Don't be friends with people at work. Wait, but my career depends on strong work connections. Which is it? I bet you have a really strong feeling one way or the other. And I'm going to go ahead and say you're right. Years ago, I would have completely disagreed with the title of this video, but I've come to see a different way. I learned the hard way that confusing colleagues as real friends can be really hard and disappointing. You see, I'm an extrovert and I adore people. I love connecting deeply with people, and being at work with someone, sharing day-to-day things, made it feel like we were real friends. But that led me into trouble. What I learned is that work relationships are precious, but they need to be defined correctly. I got really confused after having deep relationships at work, oversharing, connecting, hanging out in real life, then to feeling betrayed or disappointed. I shut myself off and tried to be overly professional with no connections. That didn't work either. And I realized that I did still have to have connections at work in order for people to want to work with me, for me to have positive references, for me to have real deep collaboration at work. So I learned that there's actually a really big difference between a colleagueship and a friendship. And I learned that both of them are actually really precious and special relationships, but they can't be confused for one another. It is confusing though, because a really great colleagueship can feel as intimate as a friendship. And that's where things start to get really blurred. Let's define friendship. Friendship is personal. It's based in real deep trust. It's in unconditional even love for someone who you're deeply connected with. And real friendship takes years to develop. There's unconditional support and deep, deep trust in a good friendship. On the contrary, a colleagueship is based in work dynamics. It's put together because of a situation and is professional and built on mutual benefit. Why it feels so confusing is because you spend so much time at work. Oftentimes we see our colleagues more than we see our family or friends, and we can experience really deeply defining moments with our colleagues, other problem employees or problem clients can really create this bond of understanding. I know some colleagues almost deeper than I know some of my friends because I know their real strengths. I know their weaknesses. I've seen them and I still work with them and I still want to work with them. There's an intimacy in that, and that's okay, right? It doesn't mean you can't be friendly in a colleagueship. You just can't expect the same things from a colleagueship that you would expect from a friendship. And when we put those friendship expectations on a colleagueship, that's when things get really messy and hurtful. Let's dig deeper. Work relationships are situational. That means you've been put into a situation, into a place together, and you have to make it work. A friendship is based on choice. You see each other for a long time typically before you fall into a deep bond of friendship. So in the situational space, your titles comes first. Your job duties come first. Your ability to do the work comes first. There is a codependency on your ability to do your job. And if I come to work expecting you to be my friend first and not a colleague first, or if I expect you to show up as a friend for me and support when it's inappropriate because we're in a colleagueship, that's when things get really, really messy. That doesn't mean it can't exist. You can show up to work, be a proficient colleague first, and then take that deeper bond you might have with your colleague and be more vulnerable and be more open. But you would take it to what is appropriate with that colleagueship. Some colleagueships start and end with just titles. We interact just as our titles. We do what we need to do in that situation. Other colleagueships do go deeper. However, you still need to show up as a colleague first. You need to complete your job duties in that situation. The second reason is that competition happens. In a good colleagueship, ethical, healthy competition needs to happen, and we need to permit it to happen. So for example, there might be a moment where you and someone who you're in a deep colleagueship with might be up against each other for the same role. And that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. If you're approaching that colleagueship as a friendship, it might feel like a deep sense of betrayal, that your trust isn't there. However, when you understand the rules, that as a colleagueship, this competition is good and healthy, then you can actually support each other and let go of what the end results will be. A bad colleagueship turns ugly, where people start to use ugly tactics and unethical tactics to lie and cheat to get ahead of you in work. And that is something you need to understand, that people might be playing those games. And I think that you, just like you can tell good friends apart from bad friends, you need to be able to tell good colleagues apart from bad colleagues, and really not take it to heart. You see people for who they are and you trust them, and you understand that you cannot have a healthy colleagueship with someone who uses those ugly tactics. And be shocked if it happens. Expect the best from your colleagues and your colleagueships. But just understand that just like a bad friend, these things can happen. The third thing about colleagueships is that there is a codependency we have due to the nature of our work relationship. That means that if you're doing a bad job in your role, my role might be in question. Our whole company health might be in question. Performance of the team might be in question. So we are codependent. We're dependent on each other for our performance, for our team's performance, maybe even for our income if things go that bad. That doesn't necessarily happen in friendships. We don't have that codependency. So I might be able to fully come and vent in a friendship about all the dirty, ugly things that happen at work. And that's appropriate. That's what friendships can be for. We can really vent. It can come across a little bit different if you come and fully vent about your personal life to colleagues. Now, don't get me wrong, in some colleagueships, you might have that bond. But let's say you are constantly showing up to work with your personal drama first and not performing your role. Your colleagues, even though they might have a deep bond for you and a deep like for you, are going to start to have a different reaction than a friend would. They might start to get frustrated. This actually happened to me with someone who I mistook as a friend, and she was a lovely person and had a constant drama with her boyfriend. And I felt really bad for her. It sounded like a bad situation. At that time, we actually shared a workload. And so there'd be days she would come and she would tell me about something bad that had happened. And so I would sort of do a little bit more of her job. And that was okay. In a good colleagueship, we might support each other like that. And we have to support each other like that sometimes. However, this started happening all the time. It started happening weekly, then daily, and I started to get really bitter because I didn't have good boundaries and I was mistaking that as a friendship. This is where in a colleagueship, you have to be mindful. You have to protect that colleagueship from it venturing into that inappropriate friendship area, and you might have to say no to things. The good thing that I found from that situation was that when I defined that colleagueship for myself and started showing up that way, the other people seemed to be very respectful of that and very understanding, and it actually propelled us to have deeper connections later on. And I'm happy to say that two of my closest friends right now are actually someone I've worked with in the past, but that didn't happen until a lot later in our work life and then after our work ended. The fourth difference, let's talk about survival versus loyalty. So if you're getting this wrong and you're expecting your colleagues to show up for you like a friend would, you're expecting them to fully stand up for you. You're expecting them to speak up for you or with you or stand up against something. And that would be great for a friend. And maybe in some work situations that could happen. It has for me, but they were very specific. The truth is that in a healthy colleagueship, I can't expect that of you. I have to respect that you're there for survival, and I might not be privy to your bank balance, to your debt, to your insecurity about getting future employment. I don't know where you're at with that, and so I can't expect for you to put your survival on the line for something that I believe in. And that can feel like such a confusing piece and such a big piece of betrayal. And that's when you have to understand that it's not personal, it's professional. That person might be an amazing friend and be able to stand up for you if you had been in a friendship. But because you're in a colleagueship, it's unprofessional for me to expect that of someone. So number 5, the difference between oversharing and venting and a friendship versus a colleagueship. Good friends can be there for us when we need to vent and just overshare. And we might share absolutely everything with some dear, dear friends. However, there might be topics that are not appropriate for you to talk about with dear, dear colleagues. Because if you're talking about doing things that are, true story, illegal, or where you're partying so hard you're missing work, or maybe you've called in sick when you weren't sick, and you share those things with someone that you're maybe truly bonded in a colleagueship, that starts to affect the way that they see you at work. And they don't mean to. It's a natural response. They might start to question your ability to do your work. They might start to respect you slightly less. And so those things are not for sharing within colleagueships. Protect that professional relationship. Understand that that comes first, and that deeper bond you have with them is still precious, important, but not the same as a friendship. So no, colleagues are not your friends, but with good, healthy boundaries, with a good, healthy definition, they can be really precious and deep relationships. They are places where you can have creativity, collaboration, where you can innovate in a way that you can't in friendships. It's a very special place. As I mentioned earlier, a colleague is going to know you and like you and respect you, and they can see some deep faults that we all as humans have at work. That might not be something that friends can see. To summarize, when you define those relationships correctly, you put in healthy boundaries, you understand your level of professionalism and commitment to a role, then you can have deeply, deeply meaningful relationships and connections at work that can last a lifetime. And that might actually build into a true friendship, or they might stay as something even more special, something like a mentorship. So do you agree or do you disagree? Let me know in the comments.